Hello, everyone, and welcome to the My Healthy Home Summit. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Caroline Blazovsky. I'm a national healthy home expert and environmental residential consultant with over 24 years of experience. This summit is designed to educate you about the process of creating a healthy home, to learn how our homes may affect our health and wellness, and the benefits associated with living and working in healthier spaces. We've compiled some of the most decorated speakers in this arena to help you on your journey. Today, we are joined by guest Brandon Chappo, who will be discussing healthy home public policy. Are we protected in our homes? And what can we do to change laws and safety parameters to help protect us? Welcome, Brandon Chappo. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you.
Hi, Caroline. Thank you so much for having me a part of this wonderful summit to talk about public policy, something I'm very passionate about. Again, I'm Brandon Chappo. I'm a co founder and a director of public policy for Change the Air Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We help families across the country breathe safe indoor air. How I got involved in this space was from a personal experience. A few years ago, I was working as an air traffic control specialist for the Federal Aviation Administration. I'd moved into a water damaged rental in Cleveland, Ohio. Of course, I didn't know it was water damaged at the time. And after a year of living there, I just started having terrible health symptoms that I'd never had before because I had to have a class two airman medical to be able to do that position. So this was highly unusual. I was, having dizziness, headaches, brain fog, insomnia, gastrointestinal issues, you name it. Kept going to doctor after doctor, was going to the world renowned Cleveland Clinic. They couldn't figure it out. And I got a lucky break. I saw a physician at the functional medicine center at Cleveland Clinic, and she asked me a crucial question within a couple of questions in our first meeting. And she says, "Tell me about the space that you've been living in. Tell me about your home." And of course, at the time, I say, well, older home, it's in a great neighborhood, exposed brick, original hardwood floors, the aesthetic was beautiful. And she said, yeah, I'm not really looking for that. She said, any musty odors, any water leaks, any areas of water intrusion. And I said, well, yeah, down in the basement almost all the time. There's water down. And I'll never forget it. She stopped typing her notes up. She took her glasses to the edge of her nose and she said, "So tell me why this isn't a good story for mold." And that statement changed the course of my life. I don't want to be too overly dramatic about it, but it really did. We had the building tested. Of course, it was rife with a number of different molds, which we now know only exist in chronically water damaged buildings. Had to move out. I lost a lot of my belongings. It took years to get my health back on track. And but at the time, I started wondering, man, I wonder how if there's been other people that have been affected by this. This is really the first I've been hearing about it, and to that severity. And Carolyn, I can't tell you how many people, countless, just in the state of Ohio, that I was running into, individuals and families that were devastated by this. I started to look into the laws, public health information. There was almost nothing. And so my background's kind of interesting. I was always a bit of a nerd growing up. I always liked history and government. That always interested me for some reason. And I thought to myself, geez, I'm going to try to, contact my state legislators about this and staff. I mean, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I think they ought to know about this and maybe there's something that could be done, you know? And so I did, and I got really lucky. One representative's office got back to me at the time. And turns out his legislative aide got sick from the same thing, not as severe as I was at off campus housing at Ohio State. And Representative Joe Miller, upon hearing my story and being a constituent of his, said, "Let's meet." We talked about the issue. We talked about how much it affected me, and he wanted to do something about it. So back in 2020, just in the throes of the pandemic, we got House Bill 251, the Ohio Indoor Safe Air Act, up and running, and it would to establish an indoor mold program through the Ohio Department of Health to educate the public, to spread awareness about the potential dangers, and also how to look for good remediators and inspectors and what you're supposed to, because that information just largely just doesn't exist. And I know you know that. So fast forward a couple years, I got into the policy space. I loved it. moved down to Florida, got with a few folks that were passionate about the issue, Michael Rubino and Kendra Seymour, and we wanted to found a nonprofit. So Change the Air Foundation launched in June of 2022, and I lead one of our three initiatives: education, research, and policy, and I lead our public policy initiative. And basically, we've been working across the country with volunteers, passionate advocates, people that have suffered, that want to do the same thing, use their voices to make an impact. And we've been working at both the state and federal level and gotten some proposals up. And there's some bills even moving through the process right now, which I'll be happy to get to. But sorry, that's kind of a long way to tell you how I got into it.
No,
But
it's
I think it's
amazing.
important context. Yeah.
No, it's amazing. And, let's talk a little bit about how we're not protected. So before we're kind of talking, because people, and we've talked about this in the summit a lot, that there's this false sense of security that consumers think that in our homes, whether it's building products or it's protection for, like we're talking about water and mold damage, that we're protected. So can you kind of tell us how we're not protected?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's actually, when you start looking at the scale of this, EPA did a building survey, and they estimated about 50% of buildings in the survey had a current leak. 85% of them had a history of a leak. So the scale of this is enormous. And when you look at the laws at the federal level when it comes to indoor air quality isn't regulated by the EPA. It states that plainly. Now, I always found that kind of interesting. We've been regulating as much as possible, and of course, there's still a lot of work to do. Outdoor air quality, or ambient air, which is important, no doubt. But yet, for some reason, we've left out the spaces and places that we reside 90% of our time, which is indoors somewhere, right? You and I are both inside right now,
Sure.
whether it's in your home, a school, hospital, wherever you're working. So when I started this journey, and everything, like the light bulb kind of comes off. And I know you've been doing this for a long time, and you've been advocating for this, and you've been well ahead of the curve on this. And it took me getting ill to really see just how crucial and important this is. I was really alarmed to see that we're not protected. I mean, when it comes to mold and water damage, um, in particular, there's really inconsistent information when it comes to the public health ramifications of being exposed to mold. Additionally, uh, when it comes to inspections and remediations, there's only 5 states in the United States that would require a licensure or a certification to be a mold remediator. I think there's only one state in New Hampshire, as far as I'm aware, that would require a mold assessor or a mold inspector to be certified. So there's not a lot of public health information. Residential disclosures or commercial disclosures are quite weak. I'll just say it that way.
Yeah.
They never really include mold in, amongst all the other indoor pollutants and hazards like lead, asbestos, radon. For some reason, they leave mold out of that conversation, just, talking about that specifically. And certification requirements. For some reason, mold and water damage just has been left out of that conversation. When lead, asbestos, and radon, they're trying to make a push for that, and I think it's leaving people vulnerable. It's keeping people sick unnecessarily, and I think that we have to do something about it. So that's kind of why we're pushing the policy piece.
And what's interesting is when you look at a home, there's a couple things I can guarantee as an inspector is that you're going to have at some point a leak or water damage. It's 99%. You are going to, as a homeowner, have a problem with water. There's no, whether it's a
Right.
shower, it's a bathroom, it's a kitchen, it's a dishwasher. We know that, like, check the box, you're done. You're going to have some
Yeah.
water damage. Now, I don't know if, the insurance companies have really started limiting any kind of mold coverage. And what people don't realize is that when you have a homeowner's policy, a lot of people have a false sense of security because they think, hey, I've got homeowners, I'm covered. I don't have to worry about it. Then they have
Right.
the incident. Now they've got a water leak. They've had a pipe break. They go to their policy, and the policy says, nope, sorry, guys, no coverage for mold. Do
No
you want to
coverage.
talk about that? Have you ever had experience where you've heard about people not being covered?
Oh, countless, countless. And I'm just only speaking about a few aspects of the policy side when I'm talking about public health information, right? The why behind it's important for somebody to be certified or licensed when they're inspecting the home, or that they know what they're doing, or when they're fixing a sick building. But the other sides of this equation are insurance coverage or lack thereof, and building codes, which have a lot, right? So, what's at the root of, well, there's always going to be a leak. And I totally agree. I mean, whether that's a natural disaster or whether that's something that, just occurred as a part of people living in the home or what have you. But when it comes to the insurance side of this, oftentimes, and I think you put it the right way, that they have a false sense of security. I cannot tell you how many people in our community um, bought a home that was water damaged or chronically water damaged. They didn't know about it. And when they went to go see if they could get insurance coverage to have it inspected or remediated, it didn't exist. Or if it did exist, which isn't in many cases, it was capped, usually at about up to about $10,000. Now, remediation jobs, depending on the size of the home, that's not going to cut it. So these folks don't have the insurance coverage. They don't really have any money to be able to do this on their own. So what money that they do have, they're taking out of their savings. They're taking out of their kids' college funds. They're having people come into the house that don't really know what they're doing, or they're having a remediator come into the house that really doesn't do an adequate job. They move back into the house and they're still sick and they're left holding the bag. So now
That's
they're
right.
not only emotionally, so they're physically, uh, you know, the physical toll of this is immense, emotional, and now it's a financial issue. So the insurance side of the equation is problematic. And I think in the future, it would be something that I would like to, and I know at the foundation and other organizations, we probably need to come together with the industry to see what we can do to try to better protect people in that regard. Because you're right, water intrusion is going to happen. We're going to try to mitigate it as best as possible with better building practices, with more information and education and knowledge by tenants and landlords.
Mhm.
Um, but it inevitably, I think that unless we change those things, we're just going to be in this perpetual cycle of people continuing to suffer and to be ill, and there to be structural issues. So I think there's a lot of benefit for this conversation, really, and for us to move the ball down the field.
I like when we're giving away tips, and you struck something in me that I always tell my clients, and we're going to tell people on our talk, which I think is going to be profound. When you have your homeowner's policy, you can always request what's called a rider. So you call up your
Yeah,
home insurance company and you say, I'd like to put a mold rider on my policy. This is something that is relatively cheap, believe it or not. Like people think, oh, it's going to be super expensive. It's not. Ask them to add a $30,000 rider. Ask them to add a $50,000 rider, whatever your budget is comfortable with. Add that to your policy, and then you're covered. And it's something people don't know to do, but it's so
yeah,
key to creating it. Just call and ask. And if sometimes you may have a policy where you do have some mold coverage built in, but a majority of the time it's not. So just request it.
totally agree. And I think that's a great piece of advice. Um, and what's interesting is I think this is kind of behind our push for awareness, because if people understood, I mean, truly understood how this could be affecting you or your loved one or a family member or a friend that you're seeing suffering,
Mhm.
they would readily, I would think, especially for not that much of a cost to them, put a rider on or know to ask for one. And I just don't think, really, Caroline, I people don't know the why. Like this entire time that I've been in this space, I've been thinking, why hasn't there been better protections over the last 20, 30 years in this? Why hasn't there been certificate? Why people don't understand this? And we're still learning more, obviously. But I think if they understood just how with the impact, the severe impact that this could have on themselves, and how that could protect them financially, physically, emotionally, they do it in a heartbeat. I know I would,
Mhm.
right? So I think you touched on a really great point there.
And also, we're talking like here, we're strictly talking about water damage, right? We're talking about mold. We're talking about infiltration of any kind of water, whether you have flooding, leaks, etc. But now
Yeah.
let's branch that out a little bit. We've got all these issues. This summit is talking about building products, volatile organic compounds, chemicals, pesticide exposure, radon, lead, Legionella. I mean, it goes on and on and on in a house. And
Yeah.
we are so not protected as consumers, and we think we are. And that's the scary thing, right? So we're talking about just pushing in one area. And I want to talk a little bit about what you're doing to push policy.
Sure.
But we need so much help. So where let's just talk about, where do you think people should go, or how do people get involved? Where are we going to make the strongest impact, and how can we as consumers help people like you to get things out there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, I'll use our own experience and what we're doing at the foundation. First thing I would do, and I think a great ROI, even though it's a longer game, is policy reform. And believe it or not, it takes $0 for you to do that. You as a constituent can go and look up who your state representatives are, right? You're going to have one representative or delegate, and you're going to have one state senator. You're also going to have a federal representative and a federal senator. So there's two levels that you can push, as well as your local government. And you put in your address, you find out who your representatives are, their contact information pops up, and you email them or you call them and say, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you about an issue that's really important to me, has affected this community, where we're really struggling on laws and regulations. We have a great opportunity for growth. We have great legislative approaches that I'd like to discuss with you," and set up a meeting. Work with our organizations in in the healthy home space or in the indoor air quality space that are like-minded and like-spirited. Typically, organizations will have people like myself, director of public policy or director of government relations or government affairs, that this is what they do. Um, it's really powerful for a legislator and staff. Of course, it is when they have organizations reaching out to them and setting meetings, sure. But the most powerful thing is when they have one of their constituents doing so. And what we found at Change the Air Foundation is that when you have both, so we're kind of going in arm as a united front. We have volunteers, so constituents. We have a number of organizations, and we all plan a meeting together. And we get on with a representative or a senator. We tell them our stories, right? Because they want to hear how this has affected you or how this is affecting somebody else. And also, when you move them on that issue, which you will, I promise you that, um, they're then going to say, "What can we do about it?" And this is the other crucial piece. Before you were to go into these meetings, know, just speak your heart, speak your truth, but also go in with a few legislative approaches and ideas, because you have to remember something. These folks, these representatives, they might be in a district overseeing over 100,000, a couple 100,000 people. There's multiple issues that they're dealing with. Staff, there's very few staff. So when you're coming in, you're kind of the expert on this to them, right?
Mhm.
Really. And
Good point. Yeah.
feel empowered by that, you know? Um, Also, what I found is we work with so many passionate, amazing volunteers at Change the Air, which I'll get into. But we have a few bills going right now in the Midwest, kind of interestingly, Iowa, Illinois, and Ohio, and we have a number of advocates that have reached out to us, that we've set meetings with, that we've walked through the process to, and kind of partnered up with a few other organizations, and we've gotten bill proposals pushed forward. And the one thing that I always hear a lot of folks say is, "Hey, I love what you're doing. I want to use my voice. I want to use our experience for some good. I just don't know what I'm doing. I just don't know how the process works." And that's where I can come in and say, "Don't worry. I'll help you up the mountain. The foundation will help you up the mountain. I'll explain it. We'll put it in layman's terms, um, and we'll make it reachable for you." I always felt like democracy was unreachable for folks. They always felt intimidated by the whole process,
Yeah.
when really you shouldn't be. This is as a constituent, this is something that you should feel, again, empowered to do, but also almost a little bit of an obligation. Like if there's a problem, stand up, gather around with people and speak out and try to make an impact. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, you
I
did. You
think that
did.
that's I
Yes.
think that's the first place to start. Get with organizations, find out who your own representatives are, get with other constituents in your state or region, and start setting meetings at the state and federal level with your representatives. That's why they're there. They're there to serve you.
Do you find, I think too, with social media, with this presence of just cameras everywhere and being able to text immediately, I think the
Hmm.
availability to our representatives is better than it used to be back in the day. Like it used to be this challenging chore to find out how to contact someone. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree with that. I've thought a lot about how lucky I am. Well, first of all, I feel privileged to be doing the work that I'm doing. I mean, truly, I do. I also felt that I was lucky. I wasn't lucky to get sick, and nobody is, but I was lucky in the sense of for this type of work that we live in the era that we do. Because
Mm.
you're right. I've often thought about this. What about 30, 40 years ago? Okay, yeah, you could call, right? Or you'd maybe have to write. But now the era of this technology and making people more reachable and offices more reachable, and literally you can just send a message,
Mhm.
on their website to them, or you can set up a virtual meeting. I don't even have to travel down to Columbus to the state house if I was in Ohio or any state house to have a meeting anymore. All we have to do is set up a virtual call. Now, how amazing is that? So, um, to your great point, yes, this era that we're living in has made this process that we're talking about, policy reform, the easiest that it's ever been in human history, and I can say that with full confidence. So, use that to your advantage. I'm telling you, it's really made a huge impact on the work that we're doing and we're going to continue to do, to connect with folks from across the country, and doing it from wherever you're residing. Of course, it's always helpful to do an in-person meeting. I don't want to take
Of
that
course.
away.
Of course.
When and where you can. I mean, we've been advocating in Washington D.C. a couple of times on a federal bill that we helped get put together, which I can speak a little bit to. Those in-person meetings are crucial. And of course, I've had volunteer constituents, through the foundation doing policy reform work with us that have met for coffee, with their representatives. And there's just something to be said, Caroline, for having a face to face interaction. It's like you can really humanize an issue a lot more by having a video call or being in person than just sending an email about something, because they can put a face
Mhm.
to
Of course.
a face to the problem, right? And I think that moves them.
So tell us what kind of current bills you're trying to get passed and where you're starting, because it's such a, indoor air quality is a huge topic, right? So
Yes.
where are you focused?
Great question. Well, of course I started in Ohio just because of my own situation, and um, but right now we're working in about 18 different states, all different levels of activity, of course. Um, but we've had, let's see, eight bill proposals put forward so far in six different states. That's because two states had two separate bill proposals put forward. We've had a federal bill that we helped work on, called, the Healthy at Home Act 2023, which I'll speak more to. But really, what we're trying to do is, and again, I'm coming at this from a niche of the indoor air quality healthy homes, spectrum, which is mold and water damage.
Mhm.
It's like the Wild West out there. In other words, there's like nothing. So really, and this is what I tell people. I said, okay, yeah, like that's daunting to be like, well, there's nothing. I have no idea where to start. And I said, okay, but like look at it like you're a painter. We have this beautiful blank canvas that we can turn into an amazing picture because there isn't much. So after a lot of deliberation, after a lot of discussions, with many folks, we felt that there were a few areas that we could really start to push to make the most impact with our time. And those are, public information and awareness programs through state departments of health, certification or licensure requirements for mold inspectors or remediators, depending on the state. Right now, again, there's only five. I think they're Texas, Louisiana, Florida, New York, and Washington, D.C. So all the other states, no certification requirements. That usually gets people to be like, I never knew that. Because a lot of folks I talked to, even legislators, were like, I had no idea that that wasn't required. Like it's almost assumed because it's such an important topic.
And you need to
Um,
ask when someone's
yeah,
working on your property, um, like in New Jersey, where my company's based, we don't have laws to dictate licensing. However, the good
yeah,
professionals, let's put your fingers up, right? We have certifications. We go to the ACAC and get our certified mold remediation certifications. And so there
yep.
are national places that you can get certified and really good ones. But you want to make sure that your contractor is doing that.
100%. Yeah, it's so important because again, there are a number of varying levels of expertise, I'll put that way, out there in the space. And unfortunately, I cannot tell you how many, I mean, it's been countless families that have come to us and said, I had a bad inspection, or they said that there wasn't anything really when it was rife with it. They're out all that money. They had a bad remediation. They moved back into the place. They didn't even scratch the surface of where the problem areas were. So it's that important. So that's again why we think coupling the public health information and awareness program with a certification requirement is a great starter bill, and we've got that going in Illinois right now, House Bill 4476 through Representative Syed, which I can talk more about. But there's a couple of other areas that we like to push for too, and that's firmer disclosures because we think it's important for folks to know where they're going to be working or where they're going to be moving into, what home they're going to be buying. I mean, this is one of the probably the largest purchase that one will ever make in their entire lifetime. I
Absolutely.
I would
Mhm.
certainly want to know if it's safe for myself or for my family or for my future family. Would not you? Right? So
Mhm.
um,
100%.
so that's important to us. And then, of course, we're always pushing for more appropriations and funding for more research in this space because there certainly are a lot of areas that we think need to be sussed out better. So, but those first couple of areas are really our bread and butter issues right now, and that's really what the legislators are going for. And by the way, this is kind of neat. When we got into this, space and pushing policy, there, there's a lot of political topics out there. I don't need to tell you this or to tell the audience this, that are very hot button items, right? You're going to have, you know, things that one side doesn't want to talk about or isn't going to move on, or another side has red lines in the sand. But almost every office that I've talked to, progressive, conservative, Republican, Democrat, they've all been supportive of this issue on merit, which has been wonderful. Um, when we like to say when we went to Washington D.C. and we met with about 30 congressional offices over that week that we were there. It's about 5% of Congress. And Caroline, it was great. We didn't meet one office that was pro mold or pro poor indoor air quality,
Yeah,
which I thought was great. Right. So we but that has played out actually at the state level. So in Ohio, for instance, we have a new version of that original bill. House Bill 282 is the new version for an indoor mold program. And that has bipartisan sponsorship. So a Democrat and a Republican both got on board to sign to put that forward. They're able to put all the other political differences aside to push that. In Illinois, we have a Democrat led bill, but a Republican senator is thinking about putting it forward in the Senate. Um, in Iowa, it was a Republican led bill. And that bill, House Bill 2070, to create an indoor mold and information program through Iowa Department of Health and Human Services, that just passed the House Health and Human Services Committee unanimously,
of
21 votes to
course,
zero,
right?
both Democrats, Republicans. It just makes sense, right? It's just a logical, reasonable issue that we can really close the gap on. So, um, yeah, I think that it's important for people to realize that there actually are issues that people can come together on, and this is
Yes.
one of those bright spots. And really, we should take advantage of that. You know,
We all have homes, right? Everybody's got a home. So there's no differentiating between us. We all need a place to live and it to be safe and healthy. I want to
you
digress a
bet.
minute because you brought up something really important. And we're talking about real estate transactions. And we're talking about, I'd love to see a requirement to mold test a home. It's one of the things that when you're buying or selling a house, and this goes to every person who's out there that's working with a real estate agent, the things that we look for in a home inspection are not half the things that I would want to see. I want to
Me,
see a mold test coming before you purchase a home. I don't care if you decide you want to absolve yourself and not do any testing at all. And this is happening a lot, right? Because of this crazy real estate market, we're seeing people purchase houses with no inspections. You need to do a mold test. You need to do a water test. These are things that are very expensive to fix on the back end. And if you purchase a house, it becomes you inherit this responsibility,
that's
and
right.
unfortunately, these can be very big, pricey items and things that sometimes can never be fixed. So I don't like passing the buck to somebody else, right? I'd like to see the
I
homeowner
agree.
who has the house have to fix that. So kind of talk about that a little bit because I think people think when they buy a home, like, somehow they are protected and they're not. And especially if they're not doing an environmental inspection or a mold inspection.
Yeah, this is a it's an important topic, but it's a bit of a tricky topic, and I'll tell you why. At least when I mean, I can tell you how I personally feel, which is I absolutely agree with you. As a matter of fact, because I don't own a home yet, but when I do, I'm absolutely going to have that home tested. It's
Right.
that important. It's that important. Here's another side of that. Home inspectors are different than an indoor environmental professional, right? Different level of knowledge, which I think that that's an
Correct.
assumption that people make is, well, I had a home. Well, this is actually, I talked to a lot, even friends and family that know my story. And they said, well, yeah, I had a home inspection done. And I said, yeah, that's a little different than what we're talking about here. They're not, they're looking at kind of a larger picture of the home and they're looking at a number of different areas, whereas opposed to we want to look at the health of the home here, right? Which they're not, I don't think they're tapping into as much. Let's just put it to you that
Oh,
way.
not at all. And the
Right.
other thing is that these real estate agents work in conjunction with home inspectors that they know are going to get the sale done, right? They don't want to impede on the sale. People want it to move.
They
It's a
don't.
money thing, right? So everybody wants to sell the property and then someone gets caught holding the bag. And that's the problem that I have,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to be that
I
person.
I agree with you. And I'll just speak plainly and candidly. That's kind of my style. Our bills that we've had put forward that had, remember I told you we're looking for the public health and information campaign through the Department's health certification requirements or disclosures. Remember that disclosures piece? Real estate industry, real estate lobby has not liked that
I
one
bet.
aspect. And as a matter of fact, that has worked against us in a couple of states to move the bill forward, unfortunately. So we'd had to remove the disclosures aspect from a few of the bills that we've had to be able to push it forward. Because I'm one, Caroline, where I don't want to keep wasting time. I want to open the door on an issue. People are suffering. We need to get information out there to people. So let's start somewhere. But the disclosures piece is an important one, and I think when it comes to real estate, yes, get the home inspected, and it's also why the disclosures are so important. Um,
Mhm.
has there ever been a water intrusion event? Has the home ever been tested for mold before? Has the home ever been remediated? And it doesn't have to be just mold. I mean, you can talk about any indoor air quality issue,
Environmental or
lead-based paint,
environmental
and
issue. Mhm.
right, yeah, absolutely. I'm just using that as an example, but most times when you see on these disclosures, like I'll give you an example. Up in Ohio, I remember it said mold had like one line, and it said uh, purchasers should be advised that every home contains mold. That was in bold, which is true. But I'm going. People don't even know like what is it like. I wanted to ask the committee, which I wasn't able to. Is like, what does that mean? Every home, like, am I supposed to be like when because people are, there's so much going on when you're buying a home. You're just trying to
Right?
fill the thing out, right? And we actually think when it comes to these indoor environmental hazards, it should be treated just like you know how buy a home that was built before 1978 and and it might have lead based paint, and you get that um, information sheet about why it's serious and why you need it. We think that should happen for every indoor hazard so that people are at least familiar with it. So I will tell you, I'd love for the real estate industry to kind of work along with our community. When I say our community, I mean just change air. I mean you and myself and our growing
Everybody,
indoor air
right?
quality, everybody, to kind of come to a reasonable place where that information is out there, and to not just have it be because it's affecting a sale, right? That they
Exactly.
don't want this information out there. It's like, okay, well, that profit or that sale that you just made now can't comes at the expense of the person or the family or the kids living there, and that's not right. So we need to change that, and I'm going to tell you right now, we're gonna work hard to change that, but we want to be reasonable about it. And we'd frankly rather work with everybody about this so that we can come to a
And
nice place.
I think too, there's a big difference when you purchase a house and you know what the detriments are. You know that there's a problem with the water. You know there's a problem with mold. You know there's a problem with structure, but
Yeah,
you actively are educated on it and you're making the choice to buy the home because that will happen. There'll be people who want to fix her up or people who want to come in and do a tear down. People want to rehab. But when you are not educated and then you buy the home and then you wake up the next day and find out there's a problem, that's what I have an issue with, right? It's the
yeah,
issue with it wasn't disclosed. There wasn't you didn't know when you were actively buying it that it had the problem. And that's what I hate to see because then I see homeowners in this panic mess and now it becomes an economic financial challenge for them and we go down a bad road. So it's knowing what you're getting. It's fine. Every house in America does have mold. There's no question in my mind that it doesn't. I've tested how many thousands and thousands of homes? I know it does, but there's a
yeah,
degree of that. There's a degree
right,
where you pass from normal mold over to what's considered to be a major health risk
yeah.
and potentially not, a problem with the building structure where now it can't be fixed, right? We've got issues.
That's right, and and what you just prompted me on that. This is another problem area, at least when it specifically comes to mold and water damage. Um, EPA, they have not set a permissible exposure limit or a threshold limit for that. So it's kind of like, and I think that this is a problem area in our space, which is, well, what's acceptable or what isn't? Or do you have to be symptomatic for it to be a health issue or not?
Yep.
Or right, or how many people in, and I think that is something that we are having active conversations about with many folks in the space, other organizations, government entities, that we'd like to push that because I think that would be helpful to have something set, or more of an understanding of a parameter of what should be
Mm.
tried to be reached to keep a place healthy, because I think that that's causing a lot of confusion amongst folks. And I just wanted to mention that as soon as you said that, I went, when you talk about like normal fungal ecology of a home, like, well, what is that, and who determines that, right? Do you have to be
Yeah, and it's
symptomatic for it to be a problem, right? So
and I think it's interesting because through the summit we've kind of discussed this that every person, every home is so vastly different. What affects one person doesn't necessarily affect another person.
you got
And
it.
so, like when you're building a house, for example, and we just had Joel Hirschberg from Green Building Supply on talking about when you're picking products for your home, like what can make one person sick. You need to
Yeah.
really know as the occupant what is your threshold, what is your concern, what are your health issues, and then you need to go into every transaction with that at the forefront because some people have autoimmune disease, some people have
Yes, they do.
migraines, some people have allergies. So when you're buying a house in any capacity, you need to put that up front and say, look, I've got to buy this type of house, use these types of products, make sure my building and ventilation is my HVAC is in line because I know I've got a weakness or a sensitivity in that area. So it's really interesting how houses are so unique to the occupants, and then we've got to design them according to the occupant.
Absolutely, and that's another good point that you brought up that I'd like to speak to for just a minute. So many times have we talked to people in the community that went, well, we're a family of four, and the mom or the son or the daughter are sick, but the dad, he might have some symptoms, but he's not as sick, and then something. So what happens then? They automatically go, well, because all four of us aren't equally as sick as the other, it cannot be the environment. They immediately write it off. Or maybe one person in the home is sick, but nobody else is feeling it. They write it off.
Yeah.
And we want to start educating people to be more aware about that, to say, don't be so quick for that. Actually, because you're spending 90% of your time in this place, that should actually be one of the first things that you might want to look into to
Yes.
tick off the box.
100%.
And
Good point. Good point.
and when I'm talking to legislators about this and staff, you know, I say, all of our bodies are different, right? To your point, which is what you just said. It's like, well, I have somebody in my family that has a bit of an allergy to peanuts, but I don't.
Mhm.
Shouldn't we all? Right? No. And that's kind of a weak example, but
No, no, but
I
it's
just
true because, like,
yeah,
where does that umbrella go? Where does it stop, right? Because then
right,
it starts to be like everybody's kind of closed in because one person has a peanut allergy and 99% of the people don't. So it's so tricky in our industry to kind of create any kind of standard because we have to really take into account so many vastly different types of illnesses and considerations
right.
and
And I think that's why, really when it comes down to it, that's why that, like, just the awareness, this type of event and summit that you're putting on is exactly the thing that we need, to get the word out there so people become aware about it. We're not saying that in every single case that this is going to be a problem for you, but we're also not saying that it isn't, so right. So yeah, right. So I honestly think, and I know it's cliche. It's like, well, yeah, everything comes down with education awareness. Well, actually, I think it does. I think it holds a
it,
lot of merit in this. In this, it really does.
and it's
So
particularly in our industry because I think when we grow up, how many times did somebody actually teach you how to clean? Right? The way you learn to clean, and I use this as an example, it was your grandmother taught your mother, who taught you, and your great grandmother taught all of them. And then
right,
maybe they didn't do it right. Right? There is a right way and a wrong way to clean. But if you never learned it, you're going to go into a house. Maybe you're going to live with dust. We shed 500 million skin cells a day. You're going to have dust
yeah,
accumulation. You're going to have dander accumulation. You're going to have hoarding that's happening, people storing up all cluttering, and all of these things that become health hazards. Right? But
right.
they're not doing it because nobody ever taught them. Nobody teaches you. There's a lot of these skill sets that we learn in homes that no one ever teaches us.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And you're only a product of your environment, right? I mean, like literally, like your health is, but also like what you've learned and what you've become aware to. And so I think that that's why, these types of events and also organizations like, Change the Air, like we try to give
Yeah.
actionable and reliable resources for free to people, videos of how to do certain tests, and we have a great podcast, that we're trying to disseminate this to folks so that they can learn and lean on it, because to your point, they may have never had an opportunity to in their life. I mean, I know I didn't. I mean,
No, right?
if you and I would have been talking 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and you said, "Well, what do you think about mold?" and I said, "Well, it's kind of inconvenient when it grows on my bread, but aside from that,
Right.
I couldn't really tell you much about it." Right? I mean, that's just because in my life I just hadn't been forced to face it or to learn about it. And man, am I glad that I was, because it really has opened my eyes, um, about how our environment or what we breathe or what we're surrounded by or what we ingest or anything, how that can affect our health. And I just feel like there's so many people in the population, that they're just unaware. So I do feel, a duty and an obligation to stand alongside you and stand on the shoulders of yourself and others who have been in this field for longer, that have been pushing this to try to help people.
Well, we love it. We love having you. We're going to do a little fast round. So we've asked all of our experts a certain group of questions, and it really helps to kind of get our audience to know you, but then also it kind of brings up other topics that we haven't thought about. So
Okay.
what is your favorite room in your home?
Favorite room in my house? Oh, probably the living room. Yeah.
Okay. And why is that?
Well, in my home, it's a kitchen living room. Like there's no divider, so and I just like the space because it's somewhere where I work, somewhere where I can get some food, and somewhere where I can go relax and watch. If I throw something on at the end of the night. So I don't know. I really vibe with that room. Yeah.
Sounds good. And then what are some of your favorite activities that you like to do in your home?
I love to read in my home. I love to read. You know, yeah, I watch some of my favorite shows, documentaries. I'm a huge documentary fan, so I'll do that. Um, and just the work, honestly, I know this is going to sound kind of lame, but I really mean it. But like I do all of my work for the foundation, which I'm so passionate about, for my computer in the house. I'm not really working outside. I mean, I could be working outside a little bit more, but I'm there a lot, and yeah, that's what I enjoy to do inside mostly.
Which brings us like to another topic, right? And just to kind of sidebar, but this is what's happening with our homes. We're creating workspaces there now. We used to go to the office, and now our homes not only house us for our family life and the things we like to do off working, but now we've got to work in these spaces. So now we're spending double the
Right.
time in them, and they need to be healthy, right?
That was something actually, great point. Great point. And I didn't mention that as a part of my story, um, that I didn't mention that I want to now was when the pandemic started and I started feeling so poorly, I actually got another job in the agency, and it was remote. Now this was before the pandemic. So what was happening? I didn't feel well.
And
I
you were
was
in the
working
home.
remotely, and because you don't feel well, you going out and partying and seeing, you leaving the house and doing so, or you like, where do people go naturally when they're not feeling well? They either lay down on the
Home.
couch, or they sit on a chair,
Right in their
or
bed.
they lay in bed. And what I didn't realize was that was the source of my illness, thinking that that was the source of my safety. Unfortunately, but it was a huge eye opener. And then, of course, when the pandemic hit, people started to move to this, teleworking footing. Um, it made it all the more important about what we're surrounded by, the health of our home, or the rooms that we're in, or the rooms that we're sleeping, when our body should be recuperating, and rebuilding itself. We're constantly being combated and breathing in stuff that's trying to break us down. I mean, it really gets that simple. So
Mhm.
I think you're right. And again, now that we're getting kind of coming out of this pandemic, and people are doing more of a hybrid work schedule, or maybe they've completely transitioned to in complete telework. It just makes it all that more important, that we're talking about this, and that we're educating, and that we're pushing for policy reform, because we're not going to go back. I would say,
No.
it's only going to trend even more so, right? That
Mhm.
we're going to be working more and more from the place that we're
Yeah, I
living.
mean, you would think that after the pandemic that the corporations would have opened up, and had everybody come back, but what actually happened was they transitioned more to remote working because they saw
Yeah,
they could do it. And then they didn't have to have the expense of having lighting and office space and all of those things. We saw it happen with a lot of the major corporations. So,
yeah. And who
I
doesn't
want to
like
ask
working
you.
from home? I mean, I do. Well, actually, I've actually met a few folks that it's just not for them. But I mean, I just think more and more people, if they're able to do it, they're probably going to do it. So I didn't mean to
Yeah.
cut you off.
No, 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 no. I wanted to ask you another question. So, what is something in your home from an environmental health standpoint, healthy home standpoint, that you have not addressed that you know is a problem?
That's a great question. I will say, on the outside of the home, there's an area that when it rains. Of course, I live in Florida, so
Oh,
it
humid
rains.
country.
Yeah, I don't know if
Humid.
you knew that, but yeah, and I always joke with people. They're like, "Well, why'd you move down there?" I'm like, "Well, I moved out of a moldy house that made me sick. I wanted to go somewhere where there wasn't a lot of
So you went
mold."
to the capital of
So I
mold.
went to the
You let
yeah,
you
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I I wanted to face it. I wanted to face it head on.
head on.
But this is the other thing I tell people. I'm like, look, like, my physician at the Cleveland Clinic, and she was treating people all over the country, because she goes, two of my sickest patients are teachers in Arizona. So that's
Very true.
that's also something that I think people always think. Well, and I've actually talked to legislators and other organizations that were like, well, it's Colorado. There's it's dry, it's cold, it's dry here. It's not a problem. I'm like, really? I'm like, I can't tell you how many countless families there, and that we're working with now to get a bill going, because they've been
Let's
destroyed by that. So
let's cut through the
um
stereotype right away. Every
yeah,
state has mold. And believe it or not, a place like Southern
Yeah,
California, they changed the building standards because they wanted to avoid fire, right? There were a lot of fire hazards, and the way they were built, they went to asphalt roofs. And now we've seen more and more mold in Southern California in houses because of the roof. The attics aren't breathing anymore. We used to have an old wood
right.
shingle. We put asphalt on it, tightened up that building envelope. Now we've got mold inside houses there. So you're not safe anywhere you are. Every house has
No,
got a mold potential.
and you know what? You just prompted something else. But first, I'm going to just tell you. So on the outside of the house, it rains a lot. The house was on a down. This is where I'm staying right now. It's on a down slope, so there's water that kind of pools at the edges. I need to. We need to get that taken care of because that's a problem, right? And they just haven't done it yet. And I know that that's something that's going to be on the docket. Um, but I wanted to go back to something that you just said, which I think was important. It's like, well, they tried to make the building codes better for fire protection purposes. Isn't that what you said? But the problem is that now the building isn't breathing quite as well. We're seeing the same exact thing in the green building
Right.
movement a little bit,
Mhm.
right? And
Yep.
I actually have been bringing this up, and because a lot of offices that I interface with or people that I talk to in the space, and they said, "Well, yeah, we need to pivot to more of a green building code." And I said, "Yeah," I said, "That's true, but I'd actually like to take that just a little bit further." I said, "How about a healthy green building space?"
Mhm.
I said, "Because what's happening a lot of times is, um, right, they're building these buildings in such a way that they're more energy efficient. That's great. That's
Correct.
less of a burden environmentally, right? And
Yep.
why are they more energy efficient? Well, they're not breathing as well, which means what? They're holding, right, more insulated, heat, cool, whatever. The problem is they're not breathing now. So, and I think it's a great, and I don't have the answer to this, but I think it's just a good discussion to start pushing in when we're having these conversations to say, I think we can do one better actually, and find out a way that maybe a building can breathe a bit better. Maybe there's certain materials that might be a bit better, that you're having better energy efficiency, but it's also better for the occupants or the people living there long
And that's
term.
what we talk a lot about in this summit. We have a lot of speakers. We're talking about building performance because we know we're moving towards an
Perfect.
energy efficient building. And now we're going to show
Right.
you how to do it in a healthy way because we know that once we create a tighter building envelope, we've got moisture in there that's coming off. I mean, we breathe it off. It comes off our cooking, it comes off our showering, it comes from climate issues. And we haven't
Right.
even talked about climate. Climate's creating a whole
Yeah.
other issue with moisture. I mean, you and I could go on, and I love this topic. This conversation's been fascinating. Tell people, um, one, how they can find out about you, how they can
Yep.
find out about your organization, and then how they can get involved.
Great. And again, just wanted to thank you for having me on to talk about this. I'm so passionate about it, and I know you are too. And this is exactly how we get the word out about this. To reach me, you can go to our website, www.changetheairfoundation.org, and you can find my email there. You can go to our policy tab, our policy page tab, and there's also a way to contact us through that. Or if you want to volunteer, or just get more information about the process, you can go there. You can find more out about the organization, obviously, at the website. We just launched a new podcast called Your Indoor Air Podcast, and that's now available on all streaming services. So check us out on there, Change the Air Foundation, Your Indoor Air. And if people want to get involved, reach out to me, email me. We'll set up a meeting and we'll talk about where you're located geographically because there might already be, this is what happens a lot too is somebody will reach out to me and say, hey, I'm in Illinois, and I'd love to do what you know. I said, hey, hop on board. We've already got 5 people working on. We got a bill. Like, call your friends, whoever you know. I mean, seriously, because you really want to create a groundswell of movement to show relevance to an issue. This is what the other thing I learned was, if I'm just, and again, every voice is important. Every voice is important. Every story is important. So I don't want to minimize that. But I have found that, when you're going in arm in arm with a few other advocates or people that have suffered or a couple of other organizations, like we work with a few other military organizations, military housing organizations, um, in this space. We work with the IICRC. Would love to work with ACAC or any other organizations that might be interested in this. Please let me know. Really, it's going to take a team. It's going to take a village to come
Oh
together.
yeah.
But what I found is that, man, when you're on a call with a legislator or a staffer, and it kind of looks like the Brady Bunch because you've got all these different people from all over the place. That's pretty impactful to them, where they're going, okay, this isn't just a one-off isolated incident. This is happening to a lot of people. And if it's happening to this many people that are on the call with us, you've got to think it's a lot more widespread than that. So, again, reach out to me. We'll talk. I'd love to talk to any individuals, or even if you're just a constituent or somebody that you want to push this issue. I'd love to help you. I'd love to work with you. And of course, any other organizations that want to get involved. We're kind of building a bit of a coalition. So
Love it.
would love to work with folks, because we well recognize how much work there is to be done. But I just want to tell people I feel very, very hopeful and optimistic for the future, because of a lot of the success we're seeing with proposals and even bills that are finally moving through committee, awaiting votes on the floor, and hopefully will be passed into law within the next year or two.
I love it. Well, you're a powerhouse. Keep doing what you're doing because we need you. Thank you so much for joining us and being here. And I look forward to seeing all that you're up to.
Thanks, Caroline.